go. Switch it over to, hey, what's going on, John?
Hey Isaac, it's going pretty good. How
Doing
you
good.
doing?
Doing good. Yeah, so thanks for being on the stream. Um, yeah, so I think we can kind of start out a little bit of just like, I'm sure people know you and your artwork, but if you just want to like a little bit intro about yourself and like where you're from, and then kind of like what you do, and yeah, we can just start there.
Cool, sounds good. Well, first, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jon Ojibway. You can catch me on Instagram as at Ojichige. My focus there is 3D rendering and animation. I typically don't post a lot of my commercial projects. It's more just personal stuff, the whole everyday grind.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, based in the Midwest, La Crosse, Wisconsin. I've been hard hit 3 years coming up. But I went to college for graphic design, and I've been doing that kind of since about 2014.
Mm. Yeah,
So
that's kind of the same time
that's
that.
kind of, where I started and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I went to school in like 2013 and it was like just a general like digital media, and then like I minored in graphic design, and it's just kind of like
Yeah.
this all-encompassing thing that like afterwards you kind of like find your niche of like what you want to like jump into for the rest of it. Cool.
Yeah, mine was this is a bit different. It's like a 2-year program at like the local tech college.
Mm.
And like I had had a little bit of experience 3D, and the whole time I was there, I was like, I should just be doing 3D.
Mm-hmm.
And then I graduated. Like I had a couple of like office jobs, and I was like, wasn't had to do.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of got you
So
into
then I
like,
kind of pushed more to do this.
yeah, like what got you into kind of like posting like more of your stuff on like Instagram? Because you've like gained like quite a big following, and it's just like always interesting to hear like how that started and everything.
Yeah, so it's kind of a weird story actually. Like degree with graphic design, like I said, I had a couple of like office jobs with it, and I was kind of a for a while I was kind of on like a contract basis with some local companies. Um, or like the work, it was a lot of just like local work for like community colleges and things like that, and it was like everything that I enjoyed about it was not there anymore.
Mm.
So for a while I actually kind of just left the and then around 2017, around October actually, so I'm coming up on like 3 years exactly for posting.
Mm.
But one of my friends from the course that I took, he was like, hey, we should do this challenge where we pick out 3 or 4 photos at a time. I'll pick 4 out for you, you pick 4 out for me, and we do like a mashup collage type thing. So if you go way, way back on my Instagram, for the first 2, 3 months, it was just Photoshop projects.
Mm.
The idea was if I had something like this challenge to post, there was a bit more accountability for myself to keep posting,
Mm-hmm.
instead of letting it fall by the wayside. And then I don't know. So once I went kind of GPU rendering was like just starting to become a thing, and then as I started to like restart this art Instagram, following people and all the people that I used to follow again, just noticing how accessible it was, I was like, it's
Yeah.
probably time to get back into that. Like, there's no reason you shouldn't if you can octane for $20 a month,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. And then everything I felt like I had learned previously about 3D was like wiped out because I had like a 3 year break, and I was like, well, I should probably I'll do the everyday thing just to get myself back into it. And
Mm-hmm.
then you get so much momentum. I was like, I can't stop. Around this time last year, I had like a hard drive failure, and it had me out for a couple weeks. So
Mm.
nowadays I'm a little bit more spread out with the posting, but I'm trying to put a little bit more into things rather than just cranking something out every day.
Yeah. Yeah, I did every days for like a little bit in college, purely kind of in the same vein to like get like I like started dabbling in Octane. I was like I should just like try to like do one every day to like really like flesh out like all like the kinks that I don't really know and like how to do stuff and like be more proficient in it. And I think it's really great for that sort of thing of like just getting you to make more stuff as like a student or like someone starting out, and then like yeah, also like getting you really like honed in on that like specific like Octane or like Cinema or like whatever you want to use, just like
Yeah.
really getting like familiar with it is like definitely something that I would encourage. But yeah, there's definitely at least a point where I think like you or like I've reached where it's like some stuff you want to do just like your ideas take a little bit more than a day, and so you just need a little bit longer of like a, if
Right.
you want to execute this to the like fullest of its extent, you kind of have to go beyond that like everyday like kind of digital sketch that you just kind of like crank out in the day.
One of the things that I liked about the everydays was back when I was in high school, I played guitar like every day. That was my thing I focused on like
Mm-hmm.
more than anything at that time. And one of the guitar players I really looked up to was he would talk about how wildly technically proficient. He's all over the place, and like you watch him and he looks like a robot when he plays it. But one of the things he talked about is like a lot of the music that he would write would stem from his practicing, and then
Mm.
he would practice this thing over and over again, and he'd get to a point where it was like, okay, but how can I so then it became from like how do I apply it in different ways, and a lot of times that's what the everyday has ended up being. I tend through like themes in mind, like I'll pick up a new piece of software, or I'll start digging into a certain aspect of Octane, and
Mm-hmm.
then it's like me just exploring how I can apply different situations, and how I can things like that, how I can create like a more efficient workflow and everything like that. But I still have that mentality of like you practice it, but like how do you apply it? And that
Mm-hmm.
was that was a huge thing I gained from the everydays is if I get a client, I can sit down and just start working on it because I sit down, start a fresh idea
Mm-hmm.
every day. It's I would highly recommend it, for anybody who's looking to kind of just get more comfortable starting with things. You get to like your 30th or 40th one, and then when a client hits you with something you're not expecting, you're just like, yeah, okay, sit down and start it.
Yep. It's also nice, I think, for clients, like at least I've found, is like if you do have like this catalog of everydays, you have like a pretty easy like flip book for them to go through and be like, oh, I like this one, and like it's stuff you've already done and already know you can like, you kind of have them pull inspiration from things you've already made, and so it's already like you're already
Yep.
at that step where you can just be like, cool, I'll just like mash my ideas that I did for myself together, and then they have their own like individual thing that they can put their brand on, whatever. It makes it a lot, kind of skips a few steps of them pulling like
Yeah.
different inspiration.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think a client sending over a bunch of references that you've made takes so much guesswork out of it because you
Mm-hmm.
know what you did.
Yeah.
It's clients send me stuff from like other artists on Instagram, people that I like follow and look to, and I'm just like, oh man, you throwing me curveballs trying to
Yeah.
figure out how they did that. But
And then another thing, kind of with that like everyday stuff, you've become a part of the like Avant Form like artist collective, where like some of that everyday stuff has been
yeah,
like licensed out. So like, how did that kind of all come about? Because I've seen like there's a lot of artists that I follow that are like now a part of that and kind of have their artwork up there.
yeah. So when they were starting to get started, Joey reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you have Joey Camacho,
Mm-hmm.
also Raw and Rendered for those who don't know?" He reached out and he was like, "Hey, we're getting started on this. Like, we're looking for some folks to kind of start. So we have interested." I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." I love the idea of having the stuff out there for people to just kind of buy as they want it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd probably say I do a lot more licensing on stuff that's already pre-made because I can, throw out at a discount versus, fully custom pieces for people. Uh, And it just seemed like you're putting that out there for people and like present it in a much nicer way than like, hey, send me which of my Instagram posts you're trying to buy.
Mm-hmm.
But with everybody that's joined up to it, and Joey's driving force behind it, like he's everything's like gold. But I liked it because it put a lot more value on it than a lot of other places. Like I definitely had a couple other similar websites reach out and be like, and then they're like, oh, well, we're gonna charge, $60 for this, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I put way more than $60 worth of work, or like, the learning that goes into that stuff. And nothing against anybody who like goes through those. It's just,
Yeah. It's just like priced a little bit differently too.
present
Yeah.
something that everybody can access. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Joey's his idea is pricing it the same way that like a stock photo website would price it.
Right.
So, like you can license it out for like editorial use, but if you want a market freeze on it, there's a huge premium on that, because then you're the only person that has it.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of, in our industry, if you're freelancing, there's a lot of things about it, but there's also like advantages that people take on you, from you. It's like, oh, well, the whole kind of working for exposure thing, or like, like, oh, could we get a little bit extra on something? And with the Avant form, it's not an issue, because it's there. The prices are what they are, and if you want it, that's what you got to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's priced very, very similar to like, if you go and you're trying to find stock photography for a website, it's priced, higher premiums for the larger resolution, everything. It seemed like a way more. It has a lot more respect for the artist and the
Right.
work that goes into it. And nothing against those places. I appreciate that there are websites out there that are letting like bedroom producers artwork for their like someone put 4 or 5 hours into. I'd like to get a little bit of a return on it, if give me any return. And Joey's Avant form was like, it just made sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of why I chose to finally join up and do it through them.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of like Music Bed or like Film Supply, which are like these places that like on top of just having like quality art, it's also like a little bit curated on who they like let on there, which is already like other than just being like a premium, they definitely think about who they're going to like let kind of show the brand off and everything, so you can like scroll through and it's not like weeding out all these like just kind of mass upload places. You have like very specific like, this is going to be like good artwork that is going to be at a certain quality every time that I like, buy from there, which I think is really cool. Also that it's like started by an artist, which is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, Joey, he is like so focused that when he sets his mind, like he deep dives. Like I know you listen to Ash Thorpe's podcast. Like anytime I start to feel like low on productivity or something, I like regularly go back to his, and just like the way he lays out how he dives into stuff is like, I refresh myself on it just every now and then, so I don't lose track of like how I want to learn, or like how I should structure learning something. He's a really prolific guy.
Yeah, and like kind of going along with that thought then of like, what do you do that kind of like, I know that you do like sort of like, pretty frequent updates on like just art that you post, but like what do you do that kind of like kicks you into like a creative flow when you're not really like feeling that into it?
Kind of going back to what I was talking about with like guitar, a lot of times it will be just practicing something, or like figuring out a flow. So, relating it back to guitar, like you can practice the same scale over and over and over again, but like, how do you take that same scale and make it musical? How do you make something something somebody else wants to listen to. So that's why a lot of my like a lot of times, if my art tends to follow a theme, it's like, yeah, these pieces look pretty similar, but in the background, there's me trying to figure out either a better way to achieve it, like a better workflow, things like that. So a lot of times, if I'm not feeling truly inspired or like have an idea right away, it's more sit down and I try to figure out, like, for instance, with Octane, their displacement is wicked fast for anybody who's ever used it. It's pretty
Mm-hmm.
apparent that like that's one of its strengths. But like, how far can you push that? Or, you know, if you are using this type of displacement, like the texture displacement versus the vertex displacement, you know, what's the best practice and how can I get the most out of it? And then once it gets to a certain point and you've put 20 minutes this item, and then I kind of just let that carry me to a point where I feel happy with it,
Mm-hmm.
or as happy as I'm going to get with it within a, you know, a single day or a couple
Yeah.
hours, you know, however much time you want to spend on a daily. Um, but it's more like just practicing the repetition, getting a workflow down, and then once you have that momentum, letting you to like a finished point, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense definitely of like kind of just like if you're if you just kind of like start going with stuff, your brain will kind of figure out like where to place it or like unlock stuff. And I feel like I do that a lot with just like watching courses or like watching tutorials or like breakdowns or something, just to get your brain like
Yeah,
subconsciously flowing, and then eventually like you'll think of
exactly.
something. Or I mean sometimes it's also just like just take a break like walk away from your computer for a bit and then you'll be able to like reset. So it's definitely just
Right.
picking which one of those is like the thing that you need at the time, which could just come kind of with like more years into it. You kind of figure out like what you need at that time.
Yeah, exactly. I had like an English teacher in high school who was always pretty adamant about like, you don't have to sit and start writing right away, but come up with an idea and just let it sit in the back of your head.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of that helps too. You know, these days if I like get a loose idea and then take a walk with the dog or take him to the
Yeah.
park, go play with my son or anything like that. And you know, by the time I'm done with that, I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, now I have 4 or 5 different directions I can maybe go with it. And then,
Mm-hmm.
you know, get a little bit started on each one. And then I find with me, you know, like the more you start on something, the more it starts to snowball.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my favorite way to work because it feels a lot more natural and less forced.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, I feel happier with the end product that way.
Yeah. So what kind of got you into kind of like off that idea of like snowballing and like ideas is like a lot of your work seems to be like large scale landscapes, but then also just like a lot of just like landscapes in general with like these like abstract kind of nice like twist to them where it's like something that you definitely couldn't like photograph in a lot of cases. Like what was kind of the
Yeah.
birth of that sort of thing? Was it just like kind of your background and like wanting to take like things you could never do in photography and like that Photoshop skill set or
Somewhat, yeah. So when I got my like first taste of 3D, I was in high school, and someone who I knew from high school who had graduated a couple years ahead of me, did a 4D and like floated me a copy. And so like, you know, I was like a 14-year-old playing
yeah.
around with that and like scale gorilla and all that. And so for originally I wanted to be like, you know, a motion designer, you know, doing adverts and like
Mm-hmm.
logo things and everything like that. How easy it was to try and do the things that I couldn't figure out like 6 years before that I first tried cinema. Um, I wanted to dive into it and, you know, try and figure out how other people were doing these things. And a lot of people will kind of lump me towards Stuart
Mm.
Lippincot's work,
Okay.
Stuzor.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know who he is. Um, he was a huge influence for me when I like very first got back into it. Um, and so a lot of my earlier projects are like look. on it. And as I got more comfortable with it and everything, it was like, oh, now I can take it and try to do the things I always wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And creating like photorealistic landscapes and stuff that was always kind of a big goal of mine. I'm like half a mile away from a river and
Mm.
half a mile away from bluffs, which are like very small mountains kind of thing. So there's a lot of landscape and a lot of scenery around here that just, you walk out and you go outside and there's inspiration for it everywhere. Um, and all of my favorite movies and games have always had this of fun or discovery. For instance, like Prometheus, which is one of my favorite movies, which is probably an unpopular opinion. But what I loved about that movie was the sense of like unknown and figuring it out. Like,
Yeah.
they're basically on the cusp of figuring out mine. So that's where a lot of the like the landscapes and the small people seemingly discovering an object or something
Mm.
like that. That's what has always driven a lot of that. And I feel like it's changed a bit recently. I'm hoping to get back towards that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm working through a lot of technical stuff with Blender
Yeah, I've noticed that you were
now,
using a
trying to
lot,
get my head around it.
and it's kind of like unlocked like the possibility to see a lot of your stuff that's like been still based more in like motion, which is cool. And I think that's been like happening for a lot of artists, is like Eve's like almost real time thing. It's just like all these crazy artists that like their Octane render took like 3 hours, now they can get it in like 20 minutes, like a whole like movement and scale thing at like a pretty decent quality. So how have you been kind of finding that?
I have been a huge fan of it. Um, I'm getting ready to eventually real because every time GI looks insane for
Mm-hmm.
what it is. But the whole reason I got started with Blender and Eevee is there's another 3D artist. I want to figure out his name quick. His Instagram has Cromfell.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I
He's
know him.
he's pretty well known for making these awesome displacement packs.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also, I've always noticed that he's not afraid to call out any of the companies like Otoy or anything like that. He's not afraid about voicing his opinion. And when he started saying about Blender, if he's throwing that out there, it's worth looking into. So I picked it up and then I grabbed some of Jama Jurabev's
Mm-hmm.
training on like his real time concept art. Is yeah, just being able to see those results even faster than Octane or Redshift is really, really like lets the creativity flow.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I first started 3D, it was back in CPU rendering days. You could only get Octane to purchase it, and you had to have the NVIDIA card, which you still do,
Yeah.
but it wasn't as accessible. So when I originally was in 3D, it was like CPU based only, and then getting back into 3D with Octane, speed lets you explore so many more ideas because it's so fast,
Mm-hmm.
and real time has just kind of amplified that. So now I can like play with camera moves more in a way that more natural, and everything is just, it's so instant and it's right there. And I think it's pursue as much as possible from now on. I'll still keep path tracing and like ray tracing in the back pocket for when it's needed,
Yeah.
but my plan is to kind of like stay away from it unless the project absolutely calls for it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a nice thing is I dabbled in it a little bit, and it's definitely like Blender itself has become a lot more clean UI wise since like the first time I peeked in
Oh
at
yeah.
it, and it was like, ooh, there's like 1,000 extensions that I have to get for this to like work as a proper 3D program. But now it's like last time
Right.
I jumped in, there was like ways you could get it to be like your cinema layout and everything. I was like, okay, this is a little bit easier. Um, Problem is
Yeah.
just like all the agencies I work with are still cinema, so I'm just like always chained to like a cinema Redshift slash Octane workflow commercially. But then like in my personal stuff, I'm just like, man, if I could just like get the same results with like real time rendering, and like Ian Hubert, I
Yeah.
don't know. All of his stuff is just like definitely like
Yeah.
proven to everyone that you can like get these insane results with like a hacky quick workflow, and like at the quality
Yep.
he does is just insane. So I just feel like it's an inevitability. But right now it's just I feel like a lot of people are still chained to it just due to like corporations not wanting to like go that route yet, and it's like a little bit sad. But hopefully, next 5 years we'll definitely see a huge adoption of it with places like Quixel and like Epic Games really pushing for kind of open source
Oh
real
yeah.
time stuff. It's kind of crazy, and I mean, Unreal 5 is just looks like a insane magical like leap forward with all the stuff that they're promising. So that would also be a cool
Right.
space.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing how like the entire landscape of that changes, because I agree. Like right now, there are so many people hesitant to make the switch over, but I feel like things we're waiting for. Somebody's going to drop the one project,
Mm-hmm.
and then everybody's going to be like, "That was done with real time," and then everybody's going to be real time, real time, real time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like, I'm trying to be a little bit curve on that, but
Yeah.
the results you can get with it nowadays, like what was the name? The Rebirth
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
with Unreal, that was mind blowing. Just the quality and the photorealism on it was insane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
So
think that was like the first.
that's like my goal eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was the first time where like everyone seriously like was like, wow, okay, real time is like there, and like obviously they had like an insanely professional team to like get it to that level, but I think that it's still pretty accessible if you just kind
Right.
of like already know 3D. So how did you find like your workflow? Did it adjust much coming from like how you would work in cinema with like Octane to like Blender and Eevee? Because you kind of have to set it up a little bit differently, or is it like pretty much a one-to-one the same way you would build it?
Um. So when I was opposite of a lot of artists, I feel like,
Mm.
because if you watch any stream with Beeple, he'll sit and he'll like get everything modeled out and the scenes kind of somewhat set up, and then he goes in and he fires up the live viewer.
Right.
I was always interested in just seeing what it was gonna look like, because I think I would fire the live viewer off, and that would be like my main viewer. So it's pretty similar, because with Eevee being as real time, you can just start it up right away. You could even do all your modeling, and so it's somewhat shifted in the fact that I do have to put a lot more work into like the nodes for the
Mm.
materials and everything to get things to look a little bit more polished with Eevee. The drawbacks of like real time rendering engines and everything requires a little bit more work on the front end rather than letting the renderer handle everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably been the biggest change, is I'm putting a lot more work on myself rather than letting the render engine handle it all.
Right.
But I think it's a good change. I'm understanding, and I'm feeling a lot more comfortable with certain workflows and like shader creation and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
versus just kind of slapping materials on it and hoping that it looks good. Um,
Yeah.
so that's probably been the biggest change. Other than that, just getting used to the different UI and Blender's navigation system and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That took me a couple weeks to get used to, but now that I'm into it and I'm kind of like delved, like I'm just encompassed in it. When I have to go back to cinema and Octane and like fish line, it's like I'm so lost inside cinema nowadays.
We actually had a couple. I had put on my story some like a question for people to ask, and I mean, obviously, a lot of it is like technical stuff that I kind of like didn't really want to get into because like we always hear that question of like, what do you use? And I think it's pretty like obvious like in the tags of posts like what you use, and like we've kind of talked about it like cinema and stuff. But like, someone did kind of want to know like in your landscape stuff like. Are you still like working with World Creator inside of like Blender and stuff, bringing that stuff over? Or are you kind of finding a new workflow for that, like real time stuff?
For the landscape stuff, I have been working on a lot of it in the background. My hopes for that is to not post any of the EV landscapes until I feel like they're on the same level or a similar level as my previous landscape
Mm-hmm.
post. So I'm still working on the workflow for that. Um, but yeah, World Creator is absolutely my go-to for anything sort of like landscape generation. Just the speed and accessibility behind it is insane.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I originally started with like World Machine,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember just trying to generate an 8K. I would get to a certain point, and like the 1K and K maps like looking how I wanted them to, but to get that final 8K map, it'd have to bake out for like 16 hours
Yeah.
with like an 8 core processor, and I just couldn't deal with it. It was
Mm-hmm.
too much. So once I got World Creator and like the speed and accessibility behind it, I don't see myself switching to anything anytime soon. I've seen a lot about Gaia, and I kind of want to dig into that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but World Creator has kind of teasing about what their next release is going to be. So I'm going to get myself back delved into that and just fully encompass myself pretty soon. So once it's ready to drop, I can just figure out how it can be pushed.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't used that yet. I've kind of been like hedging my bets more just because I've been using Houdini more and like they have this entire like landscape creation system inside of it. But World Creator definitely seems like the
Yeah.
a lot faster and less daunting version that's like a lot more accessible to people. So it makes more sense than like it's kind of the routes of like what do you want to go do? Like want to get it like good and fast now or like crazy like detailed but also takes way more time to set up. Um, but yeah, that's cool
Yeah.
that they've I've heard a lot about Gaia as well. Just kind of like it seems like it's a battle of like speed but like also like UI and just like intuitiveness of like the program where you're just like
Hmm.
I just want like this thing to be less that and then it's like how do I do that and like it seems like World Machine was like always kind of chained behind this like awful set of like nodes that you had to set up to get it plus like pretty slow but World Machine you think is like pretty fast
Yep.
and intuitive.
Yeah. So with me starting in World Machine, it definitely took me a little bit longer to get into World Creator. But once somebody contextualized working in World Machine, they're kind of like, well, World is almost kind of like working in Photoshop. You just have like layers of
Mm,
filters. And then like once that was kind of put within that frame to me, I was like, I've been using Photoshop since I was like 14.
yeah.
And then I sat down and I was like, yeah, when you look at it like that and start kind of dig into it like that, it clicked for me.
Mm,
And that's when I started to push it a little bit farther. But as far as like ease of use and intuitiveness, I think World Creator is probably the way to go. World Machine, the power is the biggest strength there. Like if you look at anything done with like a experienced World Machine user, it's like
mm-hmm.
mind blowing. What was like the film has that like top down shot of like that spirally landscape that sticks in my head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, reconnecting. There's a poor network connection.
Like push towards something like that, but it's as far as like ease of use, speed, and intuitiveness, World Creator is absolutely my choice. Just because you can sit down and bang out a landscape and get height maps, normal maps, color maps in like 45 minutes to an
Mm-hmm.
hour, and it'll be good enough to go. And
Yeah.
then if you anything you tweak it past that is just like extra finishing, and it
Mm-hmm.
like you can tell when people put in the extra work. Um, but I think it's going to be my go-to for a pretty long time.
Have you been using a lot of the Quixel stuff? I've been getting more into that just because, like, at the beginning of the year, I bought like
Yeah.
a crazy amount of credits, and I've just been trying to like burn through them on different projects. But their stuff just also seems like whenever you mix that on top of like a nice like background landscape, it just seems to like really like be like the polished touch on top of it because their assets are just like so pristinely like made that it just like it's a photo essentially as soon as you add those in and like
Yeah.
start just playing with them. So I found that as like a fun workflow.
Yeah. I started doing their like subscription service pretty late last year or
Hmm.
like midway through last year. And like you can tell in my old landscape work like where I kind of started to because I was kind of like recycling a lot of the same textures I just kept in my library. And then once I had Quixel, just the amount of resources they offer and how quickly they integrate with everything
Hmm.
is it's so hard to beat,
Yeah.
you know. And like you can tweak those shaders, until the end of days to make them look even better, but there's nothing as quick as like throwing one in and it's photo real because like you said, it's a
Hmm.
photo. So I've been a pretty heavy user with them for a long time, about a year and a half now. Lately, I'm just trying to find different ways to use their assets.
Hmm.
One of the things I picked up from some of the EV training that I bought from Jama was how he kind of recycles assets and uses them in a way so that like yeah, you used a Quixel access or a Quixel asset, but it's you look at it and you can't tell that it's a Quixel asset because you've modified it or you've made changes to it or used it in a different way
Mm.
so that it's not the same dead tree
Yeah.
model that everybody who has Quixel uses over and over
Hmm.
again.
Yeah. And I think have you messed with their program like Mixer at all? That's like the most insane way to like remix a lot of their stuff pretty fast too.
Here and there, it's going to be one of my focuses moving forward, especially with the real time stuff,
Hmm.
because the more you can do on the front end, the better
Yeah.
the end result looks with the real time stuff. So Mixer is going to be a pretty big focus of mine. And actually, I'm hoping to hopefully maybe try and find a workflow that includes World Creator and Mixer. I know there's
Mm.
a lot of people who already have a workflow like that.
Hmm.
Um, but my workflow in Octane was much different and allowed me to kind of do things the way I wanted to do it. But it was kind of like a lazy, like hacky kind of way. So Mixer, I've touched a few times, but I haven't dove as deep as I wanted to. And with the most recent updates and the painting in it,
Hmm.
it's a whole nother beast than it
Yeah.
was, like a year and a half ago. So it's on my list to dig way back into.
Hmm. Yeah, I think like anyone, kind of like you were saying, like if you just explain it, it's like Photoshop, and you just like put layers up, and then it's like they just have really
Yep.
powerful mixing. I mean, of course, because of the name, mixing capabilities of
Yeah.
like different stuff. Which like yeah, you can take like a mud and then a rock, and then like you have this totally new asset. So like you're not kind of using the same stuff, but you don't have to like buy new ones every time. Which I think is like it covers enough of that like flavor of like substance, which is like the whole allure is you can have like infinite textures based off like generation, but the problem is to set
Yep.
those up. It's like you don't get total photorealism a lot of the times, and you also like it takes a bit of front end to like get it working. So I think that's why
Right.
I really like Mixer, and paired with Quixel stuff is like you can get the photorealism, especially like in real time. I think that's why their like Rebirth test was so successful, was like everything was photo scanned and like had that upfront work,
Yeah.
which really like leaves not a lot happening on the render side, because there's like it's all real time like you were saying. So
Yeah.
the more you can kind of do prep work on your assets, which is that was kind of my takeaway too, is when I started messing with like that stuff. It's like, okay, I would normally like let Octane or like Redshift figure this stuff out like in the back end, like once it's rendering, but I kind of have to like prep this thing to like be exactly how I want it, so I can just place it and like have it going. And that's kind of where Bridge also, did you use that at all? It's like really nice. I think it goes to Blender and Cinema.
Yeah.
You just like shoot stuff
Bridge.
over.
Yeah. Bridge is pretty integral for my workflow.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I was with Octane and Cinema 4D, I know a lot of people like Chroma Dojo who does insane digital landscapes. I know he prefers to like set all of like his Quixel textures and everything up himself.
Mm-hmm.
But just for the sake of speed and everything, being able to throw it from Bridge to whatever program you're using with the click of a button, and with like the newer updates where you can export multiple assets at once, it's so hard to beat.
Yeah.
It's like it cuts down so much time and so much effort, and then like you can just start tweaking the assets from there. you can populate a whole scene in 25-30 minutes, depending on what you need to do to get it all set up, and
Mm-hmm.
they're already prepped to look good as they are. Like most of my time with those, after I export them out of Bridge, is just small tweaks here and there to make
Yeah.
everything cohesive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I normally just like it's a couple ramps in between stuff where it's like not as rough or like not as
Yeah.
like shiny or like need to pull like a color like correction on things. But I mean, compared to the old workflow of like bringing in every single map and then like replugging it in and making sure your
Mm-hmm.
IOR is all set up correctly, it's just like as long as I can skip that step, as long as I'm not like going for like total photorealism, it's like a huge improvement. And I think that's kind of like where I like to see tech improvements is like all this like busy work getting like pushed away out of the workflow is like where I'm like totally
Yeah.
happy if AI like if I could jump in a scene and just like have some robot figure stuff out like that, I'd be totally fine with that, replacing parts of my workflow where you just kind of get to do more of the art like director stuff inside your 3D scene is always fun.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things that really drew me into Octane at first was how much I could let it handle for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because you if you look at some of my old Octane Cinema 4D scenes, they are dead simple. But Octane handles like all of the displacement, the scattering, and everything, and it handled everything for me,
Yeah.
which was like a huge draw for those. And the more that we can approach stuff like that and mix it with real time, I think that's going to be like the golden age to be a 3D artist, because it's going to be like the first time in a long time you're focusing just on the art aspect of
Mm-hmm.
it. You're not just, oh, I need this one thing, but I can't find a model for purchase anywhere. So you got to spend 16 hours
Mm-hmm.
modeling a building or something
Yeah.
like that. The more, like you said, the more a robot can figure it out for me, the happier I'll be with it.
Yeah. So like what's your kind of this is a question I've been asking everyone. It's like an Everest project or like achievement that you've kind of like always had in the back of your head that you kind of would like love to get to like do at some point.
That is a good question, because as I kind of like work my way through the industry and stuff, it's kind of changed a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, I think my Everest project would probably to work on like opening titles that ended up being anywhere near as iconic as the work like Raoul Marx did with like the
Mm-hmm.
Westworld opening.
Right.
Like I remember the first episode of Westworld I watched, I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna replay the intro 4 times before I watch the actual
Yeah.
episode, because they did so well with it. So being able to put out something that's as high quality as the show it's introducing to you, that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like my Everest project.
Yeah. I think that yeah, everyone that watched that, it's kind of just like the like octane realism, like abstract, like dream project where it's just like, oh, you just want me to like
Yeah.
light these assets really sexy and then just like have slow movement. Like absolutely we can do that. And so I think that like a lot of that has kind of been cool to see. Because like main titles for a bit were like, in the 90s were like kind of like anything goes, but like it looks like they have a lot like kind of come back to like artists like 3D artists to just kind of like really like find this like interesting pace that's like rewatchable a lot of
Yeah.
times, and like different things you find in them. One that I saw recently that was really good was the Politician on Netflix, which was done by Tendril. Just had like such crazy detail on all these like little assets that they had made, and they like fly through and tell a story. Same with like a little bit older, but Game of Thrones was like one of those big like motion graphics
Yeah.
pieces where it's just like, oh man, to work on one of those would be insanely cool, just to like
Yeah.
get that much time to spend in like in detail telling a story through like a little animation piece. So but yeah, I think that's a lot of people's kind of like projects is like, and that's kind of been on my list too, is always like a thing of like I've pitched on a couple, but like never in kind of that exact vein of like the like super 3D like nice render kind of slow motion thing where it's like not really as much like a animation piece as it is just like a storytelling like through nice render piece. So that definitely
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I really, especially with those, and like even with like the True Detective
Mm-hmm.
intros. I don't know if you've ever seen that,
Yeah.
but like even something like that, how well they tell those stories and they play on like the kind of the duality of the show and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Just being able to introduce something, or like you said, like focus on the storytelling of it rather than like the technical, oh look how clean and nice this render is, versus being able to tell that story. That's eventually where I'd like to be able to be with my work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like that's the Everest for me,
Mm-hmm.
is to be able to just kind of be almost a storyteller.
Right. And then another thing, it's always fun to like see. I know you mentioned a couple people, but like what artists like are inspiring you, like kind of right now in your work?
Oh, um, I'm working through a lot of training with Ian Hubert that you had
Mm-hmm.
mentioned. I started doing his Patreon, which for like
Right.
$7 a month, this man is giving out pure gold.
Hmm.
And then I'm feeling a lot of inspiration from like Jan Urschel,
Hmm.
lately. Just because the way he pumps stuff out is like truly, truly incredible. And then my goal is to be able to pump out like a third as much work as Ash Thorpe does. That's the
Yeah.
end goal. That man he's multiple machines in one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just like it's always crazy to see like the kind of kick that he's on, and he'll go through these spurts of like vastly different style things, always like in sort
Yeah.
of the same like feel, but like just the execution on different stuff. He'll It's always fun to see like what he's like definitely into for that little spurt, and then he'll like kind of jump and like shake it up a bit, which is always like my goal is to be able to not have to like be able to keep a consistent quality with different like avenues.
Hmm.
Is like always like an end goal that I think is like super like always just a good thing to like move forward to. But yeah, that guy makes like so much stuff all the time and is always working, never
Yeah,
sleeps. It's kind of insane.
I know. It blows my mind because every time he posts something, there was like a 2 week period where I was like, I'm not gonna look at his hashtags, and I'm gonna try and figure out on my own if this is a picture of a car or a render of a car that he
Yeah.
did. And I was wrong every time because he just pushes stuff so far. And now
Hmm.
he's learning like 3ds Max and V-Ray. I can't even imagine.
Yeah. Any upcoming things like that you're working on that you'd like want to share or promote, or personal, or like anything?
Nothing specific. Pretty soon I'm gonna start digging into Unreal. So
Ooh.
that's more of what my focus is right now. All of my current client projects and everything, I'm trying to keep as Blender and Eevee for as long as I can. And then I'm gonna hop into Unreal, but nothing like super crazy. A lot of what I end up doing for clients is a lot of like just looping animations for like live visuals,
Mm-hmm.
or a lot of like album art type stuff. Um, so I got a couple of those coming through right now. A lot of people I've like worked with in the past, so I'm pretty stoked to be working with them again. But nothing too out of the ordinary that I'm like super duper stoked about. I'm just happy to be working with the awesome people that I've worked with before.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for kind of doing this thing, and just like it was a kind of
Yeah.
random shout out just to see if you'd be down for this. And I think it's always fun for people to be able to see people that like they kind of see as artists and they don't really see like faces a lot of the time, and then get to hear kind of where you started and like what you're doing. Um, so this will also be recorded and put up on YouTube about a week from now for anyone
Okay.
that wasn't able to kind of see it live. But yeah, I think that you know there's not many other questions that I had, so I think that we can end it here. So thank you so much again for stopping by.
Cool.
Yeah, see you, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks.